it's much more effective to give people information on what they should be consuming than to try and pull things away. Exercise is important, and trying to improve metabolic health through exercise is very much important. We're talking about, as of 2021, 38.4 million Americans diagnosed with diabetes alone. That's not even pre-diabetes. And that's 11.6% of the adult population.
Welcome to Five Rivers podcast for this week. My name is Sandeep Misra, and I am the Chief Growth Officer, co-founder at Heald. And I'm super excited today to welcome Erik Schaerbert to our episode. And Erik, from experience, and I'll let Erik obviously share his background, but Erik is a doctor of osteopathy and is board certified in family practice and NMM. Sorry, that the acronym gets to me, but NMM, and has decades of experience in primary care. Erik, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you join us today.
Thank you very much. Just to expand on that background a little bit, I attended the what is now the Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences, their College of Osteopathic Medicine. Graduating in 2004, I completed a dual certification residency at what was then Florida Hospital East Orlando, graduating in 2008 with board eligibility in both family medicine and neuromusculoskeletal medicine. NMM is the board certification for specialization in osteopathic manipulative medicine. So my practice was always a split between traditional primary care and manual medicine focused on treating chronic pain without surgery or medicine.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
So I guess besides the fact that we're talking on this podcast, we've got, I guess, two things in common. One, the lack of follicle, I guess, abilities or follicle wealth. And the other is that we were both, had a chance to experience life in Kansas City. I grew up in Kansas City as well, actually, just right outside of Kansas City in Overland Park, and went to school at the University of Kansas, and a huge Chiefs fan. So, hey, that's something in common. We can talk about football and basketball at a later time, but I'm glad that you joined us, and I'm excited that our viewers get to learn a lot from you. So let's dive right in. Erik, you've seen over the last, since you obviously started practicing, and even especially in the last few years, the prevalence of diabetes, pre-diabetes, just continues to be a big problem in the US, and now it's actually expanding globally as well. And there's so many different treatments that pop up, so many different advices that pop up, advances in medical care, all that. Yet we are not able to control it. We're not able to reverse the trajectory. We're not able to do much about it outside of just watch what's going on. In your perspective, why is such a big problem? Why are we not able to control it?
Well, I think to start with, we have to dive into the numbers a little bit to really kind of quantify just how massive this issue is. We're talking about, as of 2021, 38.4 million Americans diagnosed with diabetes alone. That's not even pre-diabetes. And that's 11.6% of the adult population. The prevalence is absolutely on the rise, and the rate of increase is accelerating. A 2022 study estimated the annual cost of diabetic care in the United States to be $412.9 billion. So if you're concerned about the cost of health insurance, the cost of general health care in the United States, and the fact that seems to be just flying up, then you have to talk about getting a better handle on the problem of prediabetes and diabetes if we're going to have a real positive impact on it.
Yeah, and do you feel that that patients in this case, or consumers in general, they understand, they kind of know what good control looks like, and if it's even possible, do they have that level of understanding to begin with?
Frequently not, in my
Mm,
experience. They have a very basic level understanding. They know that we have a lot of medications out there to treat diabetes. They're very aware of the use of insulin,
mm,
for
agreed.
instance, and and some other common medications are very much known in the vernacular. Certainly, GLP-1 analogs such as Ozempic and Mounjaro are becoming a more and more well-known thing in the U.S. public. Most people are aware of their use for diabetes as well as obesity.
Mhm.
Most people are aware that insulin is used. Now, when you transition from that level of knowledge and the idea that, yeah, if I'm diabetic, I should probably lose weight, that would help. But going from that level to the real details of what needs to be done in order to get a good outcome with diabetes, to reverse the changes that have led to someone developing diabetes, that knowledge really is not there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we've had conversations, at Heald with some of our members that we've worked with over the last few months, or give or take a year. And what is evident, what is I guess I don't know if it's alarming or if it's a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing that they have a control now or handle of it. Is their feedback to us saying, "Man, I didn't know that about diabetes," right?
right,
And which I'm going, and again, it's not their fault. I don't think we can blame our society for lack of understanding, because again, there's so much information out there. There's so much true, so much false, so much. Everything is politically charged half the time, and there's the pendulum swing of, "Hey man, go this path and do a diet like this, or stop eating everything entirely, take out a complete macro from your diet," and then it swings the other way around and says, "No, no, 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 we were wrong on that side. This is the right side," and then it swings back. So I think there is a sort of a confusion in consumers' mind as well, to say, I don't even know what the hell's true versus what's out there as a conspiracy theory, for that matter. So it's an interesting paradox. It's an interesting challenge that we, from a company perspective, we try to work with. And I'm sure you, as a physician, when you're having a conversation with people too, you're going, "Man, what did you just say? That's not even remotely true. Where did you get that information from?"
right,
So
right.
how have you experienced that kind of stuff too?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I haven't been in active clinical practice now for about 5 years, and I think it's gotten worse over those 5 years as I interact with colleagues and discuss this issue. And in some cases, we even bounce ideas off of each
Hmm.
other in how to approach communicating with patients to really connect with them. The what we've really seen, I think, since the pandemic is the rise of what a friend of mine called the Ike. He called him the Ike influencer, and Ike being an acronym for "I know everything." Right?
Mm.
These people speak with absolute certainty about, oh, if you just do this, it's going to get everything under control, and
Yeah.
that's never universally controlled or universally true. Excuse me. I think really for one of the things I try and get across to individuals who are searching for good healthcare advice is if the person who is giving you that advice is speaking in absolutes because of a generality in the population, not because of characteristics with you. And even then, if they're speaking absolutely, oh, I know this is going to be the case, you probably shouldn't trust them
Mm.
because real doctors, real physicians who are speaking from medical evidence are going to be hedging their bets a little bit
Yeah.
because there is a lot we don't 100% know yet. And we can speak about probabilities. We can speak on what is most likely the best thing to do in your situation because of this, this, and this, and this about you. But trying to get up there and say, oh yeah, if you just put Himalayan sea salt in your drink every morning, that's going to solve your diabetes. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because now that I'm thinking back to my interactions with my physician, right? And anytime we've had conversation about, be it general primary care stuff or something that is more or something that is more involved and something that I'm trying to handle, the usual response is more from to your point, someone who's actually doing this the right way is to say, hey, we've seen, for example, this treatment work in a lot of patients. Let's see if it could work for you, or let's see if we want to try that out in that. It's never been, hey, it worked for these 5 patients, i.e., it's going to work for you. And that
Right.
is a dangerous, I mean, to your point, it's a slippery slope and it's a very dangerous kind of absolute terms to be using to say, no, no, I know it's going to work. What? No, you don't. You truly don't.
Right. Right. And what we can do is we can look at research like
Yeah.
a good, for instance, and this also I think illustrates a little bit if you want to get into barriers to why we have such problems with control, just with treatments, is
Hmm.
traditionally we have gone to insulin very early and pushed going to insulin very early. The problem with that is that using insulin as a primary or sole treatment is going to push up insulin resistance. So you actually have a treatment that through its mechanism of action and part of what it does makes it itself less effective over time.
Mm.
And so you get a situation where it becomes more and more difficult as someone ages using that approach for treatment to get good control because you're going to have more potential to push the blood sugars too low. And one of the things we see is particularly in individuals as they age, hypoglycemia can actually be worse for outcomes than hyperglycemia. So low blood sugars can be worse than high blood sugars. And insulin, that's also one of its problems. And we've had some recent research that shows even some of our older non-insulin medications, if implemented in combination early, can not only achieve better long-term glycemic control without hypoglycemia than using insulin, but these interventions also seem to reduce insulin resistance over time, and as a result are very helpful. And the only things that we have ever seen reduce insulin resistance over time uh, in treatment of diabetes are weight loss and dietary interventions that reduce simple carbohydrate intake, particularly, but diets that act in such a way to reduce our insulin secretion after meals, and usually those are going to result in weight loss, can result in lowered insulin resistance. And then the other thing is the GLP-1 class of medicines, the entire class, if used in such a way that blood sugars are well controlled. Even the older versions of the GLP-1s have shown an ability to reduce insulin resistance over time. And then we have 2 medications that directly affect insulin resistance, and that is the TZDs, of which pioglitazone is the only one currently on the US market, and metformin, which reduces insulin resistance in the liver directly. Now, pioglitazone and metformin by themselves have never been shown to reduce like overall insulin resistance over time. The GLP-1s have, and SGLT2 drugs such as Jardiance and Farxiga, they do as well, but almost certainly the mechanism there is through weight loss because they do
Got it.
induce weight loss.
Got it. Got it. And again, obviously, metformin is a very common brand. I mean, most
Mhm.
people are very familiar with metformin. You said something very interesting, just a minute or two ago, which is that at the beginning or at the onset of or when you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I mean, some people don't know they have type 2 diabetes and might have had it for a while before they get diagnosed. But let's say that is ground zero or stage zero or day zero at that point when they find out that they have type 2 diabetes, and hopefully it's early enough at the beginning stages of the condition. So in your experience, from your vantage point that you have seen work, you said there are a bunch of things that people can try initially before going straight to the, hey, let's just give you insulin to balance it out.
Correct.
What are some of those therapies or recommendations that you have seen work outside of what you just mentioned, or what people should think about?
Well, first off, I trained with a Ivy League trained, very, very bright endocrinologist, an MD by the name of Guillermo Bohm, as I was going through medical school. And I loved his standard speech that he gave to every newly diagnosed diabetic that came through his clinic. And the first thing out of his mouth is he says, there are 5 things that we can adjust that will help us control diabetes. 5 things. And it's diet, exercise, and medications, in that order. And that remains true to this day. As powerful as some of our newer medication tools are, lifestyle interventions are still going to be the hallmark and the centerpiece of any effective diabetes treatment. And diet does have more of an impact than exercise, simply because it is far easier to lose weight through cutting calories than it is through increasing exercise. When you start to look at, running 5 miles is going to burn about 500 calories. Well, you can get those 500 calories plus. You can even double it with one fast food meal, right? So, and running 5 miles is not something most newly diagnosed diabetics are even capable of, right? So yes, exercise is important, and trying to improve metabolic health through exercise is very much important. But diet is going to be our most important lever that we can pull on to try and get diabetes under control. And I find that because the traditional American diet is so far divorced from what needs to be done to effectively control metabolic health and to optimize it, that is probably our best area for intervention, and yet our most difficult one to effectively intervene in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there's a reason why the acronym for the standard American diet is SAD, because
Yes.
I mean, unfortunately, the amount of, again, processed foods and the preservatives and something that's just got a shelf life of 9 months, a year, it should not be on the shelf to begin with. But unfortunately, we're exposed to that. Our kids are exposed to that, and I'll have conversations with my kids, and for some reason, my kids are fascinated by looking at the expiration date of something, of food.
Yeah.
And God forbid, if they see something that expired like yesterday, they just throw it in the trash. We're like, whoa, things don't go bad within 24 hours.
Right.
But I'm glad you're looking at that stuff to get a handle on what it means.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to hear just a little disturbing tangent story, a patient told me their parents had passed away, and this was in Western Kansas, and they had a bomb shelter, a big bomb shelter there. So they were cleaning that out, and they found Hostess Twinkies and Hostess Ho-Hos that had been put in the bomb shelter in the 1950s.
Oh my God!
Never refrigerated, not a hint of mold or any other problems with them. So yeah, we're consuming foods that even microbes won't eat.
Man, that is scary. And again, I was again, from a tangent perspective, I was in Japan earlier this summer on a family trip, kids and I, and in Japan, especially in Tokyo, 7-Eleven is all the rage. Most people go to 7-Eleven for their convenience and groceries and all that. And I walked in, and I actually have a picture, and I forgot to share with folks from our channel and the ones that follow our YouTube channel as well. I looked at, when I was at the 7-Eleven in Tokyo, I saw one aisle that had all the snacks and junk food. You had your chips, and you had your cup of noodles and all that stuff. You're talking about one aisle that is probably a quarter of the size of one aisle in our grocery stores here in the US.
Right.
And that was it, right?
Yeah.
That was it. The rest of the store, you had these machines that you could just buy frozen berries and vegetables and all that, and you pop it in, and it's bringing out a smoothie for you, a fresh mint smoothie that you can take on the road, and just eat that rather than the junk. So I was amazed at how, and our pace of life is not really much faster than the folks living in Tokyo. I mean, they're on the go all the time as well, but they're somehow able to have a cultural mindset that says, guys, let's try to stay away as much as we can from this. There's a time and place for all that. You're never going to get rid of it entirely, but minimize it as much as possible. And hence, the prevalence of diabetes in our country is just skyrocketing, in my opinion. And that brings me to the next question. You phrased the barriers of patients being able to access information and education and be able to make an impact. What role do you think actually the cultural upbringing or lifestyle challenges can play as far as minimizing the impact of diabetes or trying to manage or reverse it?
Well, it's a major factor that you have to consider, because if you're talking to an African American patient who grew up in the rural South on soul food, and you're making the same dietary recommendations you are to a
Mm,
a vegan who grew up in the upper middle class,
mm,
it's not going to work. You do have to be able to tailor to the individual that you're talking to. You have to consider where they're coming from dietarily
mm,
and how to steer them towards things that that they like, that are similar to what they've been eating, but bring them into a direction where they're getting more dietary fiber.
mm,
They're not being overwhelmed by simple starchy, processed, uh, and sweet carbohydrates. And there's a lot of nuance to it, a lot of modifications. You have to actually take the time to talk to individuals, figure out how they're eating, and start to give them some of the knowledge on modifications they can gradually over time make to, hopefully within a year or so, alter their lifestyle substantially so that they can get in a more positive direction. Um, I one of the discussions I tended to have with patients was, guys, if we can just get you out of the fast food restaurant, get you to prep a little bit more of your food for the week on your days off, and do it from food you get around the edges of the grocery store instead of that center section, we're going to make a lot of progress very quickly. When you go to that frozen food aisle, just get frozen fruit and frozen vegetables, and stay the hell away from the rest of it. You
yeah.
know, there's a lot of very kind of simple rules you can implement that do have a really large impact.
Mm,
Um, when you really start to recognize that so much of what drives obesity is the hyperpalatability of so much of the food that we eat, and by that I mean it tastes so good that all our satiety mechanisms, all of our sense of being full enough, go out the window. And they also will interact with our biochemistry in such a way that we get hungrier sooner.
mm,
So, just by getting off of a lot of those foods, you can cut your daily caloric intake by 500 to 600 calories without really feeling any additional hunger.
mm.
And doing that makes the difference between gaining 2.5 pounds a week and losing 2.5 pounds.
Yeah, yeah,
So it really is the battle.
yeah. It's interesting you say that about somebody growing up in one part of the country versus the other. The cultural nuances, if you will. We as a company pride ourselves in the fact that our we have stayed away from the one size fits all approach, and we like to refer to it as size of one approach. Because me growing up an Indian household had a completely different dietary makeup, if you will, as compared to someone like you, right? So,
Right.
whatever recommendation a nutritionist or a physician or whoever makes about lifestyle and nutrition choices, the easiest way for them not to work is to make them so far away from what you're used to that people just don't stick to it, right? So give me something that I'm used to your point, with slight modifications, to say, hey, yeah, you can eat that what you grew up on. Don't We're not
Right.
asking you to stop it, we're not asking you to give it up. What we're asking you to is to modify a little bit of that consumption, and say, hey, rather than that being 30 or 40% of my diet, let's bring it down to 20% off my diet, right? And then over time, maybe bring it down to 10% off my diet. And that way, you have the incremental changes. You're still getting to experience and enjoy what you grew up on, but without just completely modifying it, because it just doesn't work. I think the stickiness becomes a problem.
Right. And the other thing I find is that it's much more effective to give people information on what they should be consuming than to try and pull things away.
Well
To
said.
try and go through with them and find things they like and say, yeah, get a little more of that. That's going to bump up your fiber intake. That's going to give you more protein so that when you exercise, you can more effectively build muscle. Those kind of things. And I think doing that more than focusing on what you can't have anymore. Number one, psychologically, I think it's a little easier. And number two, so much of what has been done when we're making dietary recommendations is about, oh, you can't have that, you can't have this, you can't have, and it leads to people looking at it going, what, am I not supposed to eat or drink anything? Am I just drinking?
Stop living?
Am I on a water fast for the rest of my life? And when you can give concrete suggestions on things they can look at and like, yeah, I can enjoy eating that. I can enjoy eating that. And there are things that are going to push up health, then I think that is incredibly useful.
Yeah. So if we were to now flip the script and get to the provider side, your side of the world, right, where you're interacting with patients, what gets in the way for you? What gets in the way for physician, healthcare teams, healthcare providers to be able to provide this level of not only recommendation, suggestion, education, whatever you want to consider, but this level of service, quote unquote, to the folks?
I would say two things: time and knowledge. The number one, there is an ever increasing pressure on primary care physicians to see a higher volume of patients in a day. And I'm sorry, but in 6 minutes, you cannot do decent nutrition and lifestyle counseling, as well as explaining why they should be taking a certain regimen of medications. You're lucky if you can get one of those things done. You're never going to get them all. So I think that traditional practice model is part of the issue, and more access to nutritionists and real nutritional counseling is needed, and a transition to something more of, at my tail end in medical practice, I was working at a direct care practice. And so this is a concierge care model, but with fees that an average middle-class person can afford. And in that, you have a panel of patients that's relatively small next to a fee-for-service kind of patient panel. So maybe 500-600 patients at most. And that allows you to schedule 30 minutes to an hour with every patient that you see.
Gotcha.
That is the kind of time frame that you can use to really do good lifestyle counseling. Now, physicians frequently have to educate themselves if they're going to be good at it as well. The typical MD school, in 4 years, you might get a total of 8 hours of nutritional education, maybe. And that's optimistic. At my DO school, that tends to be a little bit more primary care and a little bit more holistic and lifestyle focused than the average MD school. We still had a woefully inadequate amount of nutritional education. And I really had to learn it as I went through residency. And fortunately, I trained at an excellent residency program. We had a certified diabetic educator who worked with all of the residents. And every newly diagnosed diabetic we had was referred to her. And she made time such that we could schedule the appointment so we weren't in clinic or could come off our rotation and actually sit in on the education session so that we could learn.
So as a physician or primary care physicians that are dealing with a lot of these patients that get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you said about they stay up to date, they have to keep up with the new advancements. Again, obviously, the pharma industry does a really good job of updating the physicians on the drugs and prescribing them and making revenue out of that. But outside of that, what do you suggest if someone someone listening in is, is a primary care doctor, or is about to go through residency, or is a younger physician? What is your advice to them to come up to speed with this, and at what priority level should they be able to do that?
The number one thing that they need to do, and this should be a very high priority for them,
Mm.
is to get educated on how to interpret research studies themselves. And the better residency programs do this with residents. The one I attended actually was very good at it. But I find a lot of physicians don't necessarily know how to interpret themselves. And that's a big problem, because a lot of the information you get from the pharma industry isn't really an accurate interpretation of these data. It tends to be presented in the most favorable light for their medication, and that can actually be misleading with regards to when certain things should be prescribed. And interestingly enough, because pharmaceutical companies are so hyper focused on their one drug, they also miss information that studies are put out where we're using combination regimens and how effective these can be. And so with regards to diabetes, there was a recent study I really feel the need to mention, and it was called the Edict study. An MD researcher by the name of Ralph DeFranzo, who's been one of our foremost diabetes researchers in the United States over the past several decades, was the primary author on this paper. And Edict was really significant because it took 3 older drugs and combined them and compared this to one of our most commonly prescribed progressions now, which is starting with metformin, adding a sulfonylurea, a medication that increases secretion of insulin from the pancreas. And then if that combination fails, taking off the sulfonylurea, moving to insulin. Well, it compared that regimen long-term with our first GLP-1 and least potent exenatide, which is an interesting story itself, because it was an accidental discovery when they were evaluating the Gila monster and its venom and saliva as a potential medicinal. And they accidentally discovered GLP-1s that way, which is, to me, absolutely fascinating. So exenatide, though, combined with pioglitazone, which has been on the market since the 90s, and metformin, which was introduced late 70s, early 80s in the United States, those 3 medications combined over a 6 to 8 year period showed better glycemic control in very poorly controlled newly diagnosed diabetics than our traditional approach did. And when you dive into it, it makes sense, because the GLP-1, particularly in combination with these other 2 drugs, has the potential to improve insulin resistance, whereas our more traditional approach would tend to worsen it. And so the fact that we had better results with it is significant. But being able to take that data and run with it, especially if you start thinking about maybe substituting an SGLT2, which will have additional weight loss for one of those drugs, or for individuals who have very good insurance coverage, one of the new drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro for exenatide, we could maybe even get much better results. So yeah, as a physician, you need to be kind of keeping track of this research and reading it as it comes out, because it really doesn't necessarily filter through in our recommendations from expert societies very quickly. That process takes a long time to shift, especially if we have an approach that's shown reasonably good results and we know it's safe. So we're just going to stick with that for a while. I would encourage particularly new physicians to get into the habit of just getting on the mailing list for, say, MedPage or Medscape. You'll get a lot of information coming at you, but look at the stuff that kind of jumps out at you and said, whoa, that's kind of interesting. Let's read this. And then you can get into the original research and see if the interpretation in the article agrees with what you can determine, and then start to figure out how that fits into clinical practice for you.
Got it. Now, a few minutes ago you had mentioned about when one of your mentors, one of your professors, and five important things: diet, exercise, medication, right? And we've obviously talked a fair amount about diet and medication as well. Exercise is the middle. Do you, as a clinician, do you as a doctor believe that, let's say somebody has started the path of taking metformin, for example, or insulin, for example, since it's in this case, number five on the list of things that can impact your overall health and diabetes in specific, that if you did the first four things well, it is very possible, it is likely, again, patient dependent, not everybody is the same, not everybody's body responds the same, but within reason, within bounds, that the first four can actually help eliminate the need for the number fifth.
Well, that's absolutely true. And the earlier you intervene in the process, the more potential there is for what we would call lifestyle-based remission of diabetes. That is a thing. And that is something, by the way, that most patients are not aware is a thing, at least when I was being exposed to them. And I don't think that has changed too much. Maybe there might be a little more awareness now, but um, I don't think people are aware of how unextreme the necessary interventions are to achieve that. And it really is about getting educated and being willing to make some serious changes in your life. But I always told patients, no matter what medication regimen I was putting them on for diabetes, and I wanted to be clear to them that there are lifestyle interventions that can be done that can either reduce or eliminate the need for these. Yeah. And whether we get there or not is up to you. And certainly, if I find a newly diagnosed diabetic and I place them on a medication regimen and their A1C drops from 9 down to 4.8, which I have seen, then yes, a trial off medication is certainly reasonable. One of the things you do have to be conscious of when you do that, though, is if we're using SGLT2s or GLP-1s and they induce a fairly profound amount of weight loss, patients have to be prepared to make further lifestyle adjustments when they come off the medications to ensure that they don't just increase their caloric intake again and slide back up the scale.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because what we have seen in the folks that we've had a chance to work with is we did get members that were using the GLP-1 drugs, especially the ones that have an accelerated weight loss associated with that. And once they started making the modification of their lifestyle, we're using, for example, what we put together for them, they use this sort of as an off ramp to those drugs to say, hey, I do want to get off of those at some point because it's not a lifelong situation. And again, there are patients, there are consumers that do need the GLP-1 drugs for an extended period of time. Mm-hmm. And I think they should absolutely get those, because those are medically necessary, right? They are clinically necessary to give them the right health. But for the most part, a lot of patients can use lifestyle modifications, as you said, as an off-ramp to say, hey, now that my A1C, for example, is in control or is starting to come down, and I know that lifestyle changes are working as well, can I start calibrating it down a little bit from the GLP-1 and bring it down to a point where it's either negligible or completely gone? And that is, I think, the ideal outcome for someone on that, because they're like, I'm done with this drug. I don't have to worry about the side effects. I don't have to worry about anything else. But I've got the similar results from a control perspective on my diabetes, I guess, for that matter.
Right. Well, and medications, in my mind, always should have been viewed and always should be viewed as a tool. They are a tool in the toolbox. They are not a necessary intervention by any means, but they're a very effective tool. And as I said, if an individual is willing and able to modify their dietary habits as they come off the drug, recognizing that appetite is going to increase.
Yeah.
as you come off. So guess what? You're going to have to be aware of that and really be monitoring to make sure that your eating habits that got you to the point where we can take you off the drug stay in place so that we can keep you off the drug.
Yeah. Yeah. And so a segue to staying on the drug topic, if you will. I've seen stats that are just mind-boggling when it comes to insurance coverage, costs of these drugs that are effective. In some cases, for example, the cost of a GLP-1 drug in the U.S., the branded ones can run upwards of $1,000 per month for a
Yep.
patient. And you go to countries like, for example, in Europe, you go to UK, you go to France, you go to Germany. We're talking about those drugs being at a fraction of the cost. In some cases, as low as $100 a month, right? So, in your mind, obviously, just outside of the obvious shit's expensive sort of a mindset, how do you think that the insurance coverage and high out of pocket cost of these drugs, how do they complicate things given the social and demographic makeup of the folks within the US that are diabetics, for example?
Well, I'm going to take it one step further because that number I quoted earlier, the 412.9 billion, less than 100 billion of that is medications.
Wow.
And that does shock a lot of people. The biggest cost are the hospital-based interventions for complications of diabetes. It's poor control that is the primary cost driver. And whether you're talking about cost of dialysis, whether you're talking about cost of amputation surgeries, whether you're talking about cost of treating heart attacks and strokes that result from diabetes as the primary risk factor, those are your prime drivers of cost. One hospitalization for an MI that involves a cardiac stent placement will cost more than a lifetime of a GLP-1 drug.
Wow.
So that is something very effective to keep in mind if we're talking about cost. But again, it's really difficult to get the kind of medication compliance you need to just treat this disease with medications, right? You need somebody who's invested in really trying to promote their own health. One of the things I loved about osteopathic medicine that when I first found out about it pulled me to go the DO direction instead of MD was the original osteopath, Andrew Taylor Still, said the job of the osteopath is not to treat the disease of a patient. The job of the osteopath is to help them find the health within themselves and bring it forth. I loved that philosophy, and I still do to this day. And I think that's what we're talking about here is physicians, practitioners partnering with their patients to give them the tools they need to get to the healthy state themselves, to bring that health forth from within them.
Man, that is powerful. I mean, as you were saying that, and I was trying to absorb it. I mean, I think that could be and should be a mantra for all clinicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, physicians alike. Because I mean, I know there's a Hippocratic oath of do no harm, but we can extend it a little bit further to say, hey, let's not just use exclusion as an oath. Let's use it one step further and say everybody has it within them to be healthy. Nobody wants to be sick or die a miserable death.
Right.
Nobody wants to do that. But and physicians, they are doing, for lack of a better term, not to get too religious, but they're doing holy work because they are impacting human beings' lives on a daily basis, right? So that responsibility, with great power comes, great responsibility, sort of thing, right? That mindset. So I love that. Can you repeat that quote real quick? I wanna hear that again.
So Andrew Taylor Still, and this was said, by the way, in 1893. So it wasn't a couple weeks ago. But as he was opening the first College of Osteopathic Medicine, part of his initial address to his second class of students was that the job of the osteopathic physician is not to treat disease. And he actually said any fool can do that. He said the job of the osteopathic physician is to help their patients find the health within themselves and bring it forth.
Wow, I'm gonna remember that, and I'm gonna share that with not only obviously our viewers and audience are going to be able to hear that directly from you, but in other medium as well. Now let's get a little personal with you from the perspective of the work that you had done in the past. Do you can you share a story? I mean, we've talked about barriers to people getting better or controlling their diabetes or managing their diabetes, reversing it in some cases successfully. And again, barriers have, as we've talked about, barriers come in many different categories, right? You've got access to care, you've got education, you've got access to food. You've got the food deserts, you've got all sorts of barriers that people deal with. Can you share a story where you actually came across where a barrier to a specific patient or a group of individuals made it difficult for them to control their diabetes? And then on the flip side, where you felt that the collaboration between you and a patient help mitigate some of the barriers so they could control and manage their diabetes better?
All right. Well, I'll tell you one that was one of the more frustrating episodes that I had. A woman who came to me. This was very, very much towards the tail end of my time in clinical practice. I was working in direct care, and she worked for a local business that paid her monthly membership, had very limited financial resources. She was a secretary in a very basic office, did not have much of an educational background. She had not graduated high school. And she was very heavily overweight. She came in with the idea that her weight was genetically predisposed entirely because most of her family was overweight. But if you got into what her eating habits were, they were not very productive. She was eating a lot of fast food, and there was a lot of room for improvement there. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have a lot of time with her before the business she was working for discontinued their memberships with us. And again, and she lost access to healthcare entirely at that point. So we didn't have a lot of success with her, especially too, that one of the things that I realized she needed more than anything was to see some success in weight loss. And just to get that idea that this can be done. And I wanted so badly at the time, liraglutide, Victoza, had recently been approved in a version for weight loss called Saxenda. And it at the time was the most effective weight loss drug that we had on the market. And I was trying to get her approved through a patient's assistance program. And there were some issues because of her education, getting the information from her necessary in order to get her approved for it. But I just knew, God, if I can get her on this drug, in addition with continuing to counsel her, she can get that little push over the edge that'll get her that idea in her head. Yeah, I can really do this. I've seen it with other patients before. And if you want to contrast that, I had another patient who was an large vehicle mechanic working mostly on long-haul diesel trucks and tractors and stuff like that. And he had injured his back. He had a very big belly that was probably part of the issue for that. And I diagnosed him with diabetes when he came in. He had no idea he had the problem. He had an A1C of almost 11.
Oh my God.
So very, very poorly controlled, and probably had it for quite some time and didn't realize it. One of his complaints to me was that he was urinating all the time. And that's what tipped me off, like, oh, we got to look at this. And sure enough, he had an issue. Well, I did get him on Victoza and a couple other medications, some of the newer ones. Fortunately, he had decent insurance coverage. And we started the process of talking about how he ate and what kind of things he was consuming. And we were able to figure out some things over the course of about 6 months that he could change to where he was prepping almost all of his food on the weekends. He worked about 50 or 60 hours, but it was over 5 days. And so he had Saturday and Sunday, and he and his wife would get together and produce all the food that he would take to work during the week. And that gave him the time so that he wasn't just going and grabbing something from Burger King, which happened to be his go-to prior to that. And between the medications and these dietary interventions, he lost 146 pounds in 1 year.
Wow. That's
And
impressive.
and I bumped into him about 7 months ago, and he was kind of mad at himself because he'd regained 11 of the 140 some that he'd lost, and he was working to lose that again, but he knew how, and there was no doubt he was going to be successful. And his last hemoglobin A1C was 5.1.
Oh my God.
So yeah, you talk about a success story. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, no, that's remarkable. And yeah, unfortunately for that, the first patient that you mentioned, her situation did not lend itself for her to be able to get the help. But this gentleman, again, it succeeded and
Mhm.
stuck with it. And that is a remarkable transformation. And what I'd love to hear from you on the same trajectory, same path, is the tools to be able to support these sorts of patients, or this sort of lifestyle changes. Do you feel, and if so, that digital tools, be it CGMs? I mean, obviously CGMs have been a big boost to be able to control, monitor the blood glucose, but digital tools like telehealth, like apps that are focused on transformation, right? Not just recommendation, but transformation. Can they? How can they help patients, if at all?
Well, I think they can help a lot. And I'm personally a little higher on continuous glucose monitoring than some of my colleagues, because there have been some large studies and meta-analyses looking at the impact of CGMs just standardly on glycemic control. And they're in patients that aren't on insulin, they haven't shown really great outcomes. But I think that's more of a misuse factor than it is a problem with CGMs. And my belief is that objective feedback for patients on any kind of disease intervention, when you have objective feedback to things that they are trying to implement,
Mm,
it's
mm,
always of use and
mm,
increases the efficacy of those interventions. And the part of what y'all are doing here at Heald that excites me is the potential for people to see how a specific meal impacts their blood sugars, how a specific exercise intervention impacts them. And you can see that in real time and get the objective feedback of, oh gosh, I really shouldn't have had that cookie.
yeah,
That, or conversely, God, adding broccoli to that meal, look what that did to my blood sugars.
yeah,
Those kind of bits of feedback are invaluable.
yeah,
And that is what excites me about the potential for some of these things, is especially if you can make it a little easier for people to track what they are consuming and
mm,
to really have a good record of it. That any barrier that we can remove as far as difficulty or level of effort needed to give feedback is so useful.
yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, and thank you for giving us the due on what we're trying to accomplish. As we're getting more and more educated about different aspects, different ingredients to life, if you will, and to be able to test them out in a much faster manner. I mean, I think clinical studies are going to get faster and faster now with the advent of AI, and models can be run faster. You can find patients to be able to test out drugs a lot quicker than used to be in the past. So I think all these are good developments. But to your point, the speed at which the society develops also indicates at the speed at which it's going to deteriorate, right? And that's, I think, that the catch 22, that paradox, is going to be interesting to see. So as we close this out, Eric, would love to hear, if for those who are tuning in, those who are listening, what are two or three pieces of advice you would give to a patient, a member, a consumer who just got diagnosed with, let's say, type 2 diabetes, regardless whether it's been going on for a while, but they just found out, for example, that they have type 2 diabetes? What are the top two or three things you would give them an advice on?
Well, first off, find a primary care physician you trust. And that probably is the key number one, because getting the lab tests ordered that will really monitor this process, getting the medications that you'll need to help you get to where you need to, and to control your blood sugars while you start to figure out the lifestyle side of it and get that implemented. That's going to be a key. Additionally, there is so much out there that is actually very positively informative of the kinds of lifestyle interventions that can positively impact diabetes. Certainly, your channel has a wealth of stuff on it, and there are others. So, trying to get plugged in with that kind of positive information to get yourself educated, empower yourself to take a positive role in this. The other thing I'd like to throw in there is for individuals who have a strong family history of diabetes but are not yet diabetic. There is monitoring that can be done very early to see if you're on the way there, way before your blood sugars go up. And I think that is an incredibly important thing to try and do. And also to try and, if your parents and grandparents are diabetic, if your older siblings are diabetic and you're not there yet, but you're a little bit overweight, start to educate yourself on what you would need to do from a lifestyle perspective to treat yourself as a diabetic, and go ahead and intervene and prevent that process. Because the earlier you do it, the easier it is.
Yeah, makes sense. And that's a very, very good piece of advice. So, Erik, thank you for joining us. This has been obviously wonderful, and I truly enjoyed our conversation. Tell our listeners, our viewers, how they can find you and get in touch with you.
If you just look up Erik Schaebert DO on YouTube, I have a channel called the Human Momentum Channel, trying to keep our momentum as we go through life here, to not let health issues trip us up. And they can find me there. And also you can reach me via email at my professional email, schaebertems@gmail.com. I certainly would love to hear from anybody who's got questions.
That is fantastic, Erik. There you have it, folks. Another episode down in the books for the Five Reverse podcast, and that's why we love bringing folks like Erik in front of you to share practical advice, to share unbiased, unfiltered responses to what's helping the community and controlling diabetes. Once again, this is Sandeep Misra. My name is Sandeep. And I am a co-founder at Heald. If you are looking for a diabetes reversal solution, please do reach out. We are at iheald.com. That is the letter I, HEALD.com. Be healthy, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. Thank you all.